Welcome to Answers That Count. If you own a business, you can count on us to give you the answers you need to succeed in all aspects of your business. And now, here's your host, Charles Musgrove.
Welcome back. I am Charles Musgrove, your host of Answers That Count, and we are back for another exciting episode. We've got one of our favorite guests back on the show today for talk number 2 about common sense economics. So this is going to be another great show where we talk economics, and we're joined today by Professor Joe Calhoun from Florida State University. Joe, welcome back to the show, and thank you so much for what we did last week on the previous show on economics. Incentives matter. That was the first one, so all of you out there that did not see the first one, go check that show out. It is very good. It's part of the book that we've got this series on, Common Sense Economics. So, Joe, welcome back to the show.
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me again.
It's it's my pleasure. And let's at the risk of being repetitive, let's kind of tee up this book and the importance of the book. You are one of the co-authors on this book, and this is the 3rd edition of Common Sense Economics.
Yeah, so big shout out to the 2 authors who started this whole thing, Jim Gortney, who's been a longtime professor at Florida State, and Rick Stroop. They put together the 1st edition, and it's evolved into something bigger, and we've been able to expand the curriculum and get it into more schools, and we built a couple of courses around it. And then later on, Dwight Lee and Tony Ferrarini were brought on board through the 2nd and 3rd editions. So it's just been a great team effort all the way around. So the book is 3 parts economics and 1 part personal finance. What everybody should know about wealth and prosperity is the subtitle to the 3rd edition.
That is it. What everyone should know about wealth and prosperity. So I would recommend those that do not have this book to go out and get it. Get it from your favorite bookstore, Amazon, whatever that may be. It's out there and it's available. And we started last week, Joe. This is actually in part 1, and it's got the 12 key elements of economics. So we went through last week, incentives matter, changes in benefits and costs will influence choices in a predictable manner. So that was a great show. We even looped in one of your favorite professors or economists, and that's Arthur Laffer. So we talked a little bit about the Laffer curve and kind of the relationship or the interplay of incentives matter with his Laffer curve. So there's a lot of similarities there in those two.
Yeah, so a quick recap for those of you who might have missed it last week. The relationship Arthur Laffer investigated was the relationship between work and tax rates, and then how that relates to tax revenues going into the federal government. And not surprisingly, because we know people respond to incentives in predictable ways, when the tax rates go up, work effort goes down, tax revenue into the federal government goes down at certain points, not at all ranges. It depends on where you start from, but relatively high rates and then go higher, we find that revenue goes down to the federal government because people either don't want to work as much or just have a negative reaction to those higher rates.
Absolutely. And, that's a very good discussion that we had. So go back and check that out if you want to look at the relationship of incentives matter with the Laffer curve. And heck, Art Laffer, he's been around longer than you have, Joe.
Oh, absolutely. Yep. He's done a lot of great work over the years.
A lot of great work, and his involvement in some of the presidential administrations over in history have been very well documented. So great resource there. So today, it is, I don't want to skip this part of the show, but we like to say the day and the time we're doing this recording, and it is August the 7th, and it is around 12:30 Eastern Standard Time. So there's a lot that happens quickly with this coronavirus, and we're in the midst of it right now. Excuse me. That is not COVID that I'm coughing from, so no worries with that. So, we're right now, when I saw on the news this morning, they're talking about I don't know if we're at number 2 or if we're at number 3 of the stimulus package, or more PPP, another check going out to taxpayers. So, Congress and the Senate and the president, they've been going back and forth on this for the past 2 to 3 weeks. So, there's been rumors of it for probably longer than that, and people have had this August 10th point in mind because they know that's when the Senate and the House go on their fall break. So they knew that if they didn't get something by today, then the likelihood of something happening is probably going to be remote. So now we're looking at the possibility of some kind of executive order to get this done. So who knows what's going to happen? But mark today, it is that we're doing this podcast is August the 7th, and it's 12:30. So who knows what's going to happen after that? So if something happens that contradicts what we talked about, don't hold that against us, because we have been drinking out of the fire hydrant for 2020 since March.
Yeah, things change so quickly. Boy, it's hard to plan what you're going to do 3 hours from now, let alone what you're going to do 3 weeks from now. So life is moving faster than normal these days.
Absolutely. So today, this is one of our favorite meal times we're going to talk about. So number 2, there is no such thing as a free lunch. So we've heard that before. That's something that we've grown up with. And today we're going to relate that to economics. That's the second of the 12 key elements of economics. And I think the first one is I think you referred to that as kind of the base, or the starting point.
Yeah, the basic postulate, the cornerstone, so to speak. We got a couple of different names for it, but incentives matter. That's clearly number 1 if you had to rank order them. Now, just a quick reminder to the audience, these 12 key elements are not necessarily ranked in any particular order. So it's not like necessarily number 1 is more important than number 2. This is just a list. We could have inverted this and still had the same impact. So it just happens to be number 2 on our list. And yes, this is the ultimate F word in the realm of economics. When somebody says free, every economist will have a little chill run up their spine, because what is really, really important from an economist is this idea of opportunity cost. And when you realize that literally everything has a cost, opportunity cost means you could have done something else with it. So the classic example is an hour of your time. You have lots and lots of things that you can do with 1 hour of your time. So if you choose option A, then you give up option B. So everything has a cost, and therefore we cannot say that anything is free. Now, what many people mean by free is I don't have to pull money out of my pocket. So yes, if you're a child and you go to dinner with mom and dad, you're going to get a free dinner. Yeah, that's free in kind of the everyday use of the word, but to an economist that has a very different meaning. Really, to an economist, what he or she would say is there's no money cost. In other words, yes, you got that without having to pay money, but there is always something else that could have been done. Let's go back to the literally what we're talking about is in terms of a free lunch. Yes, Charles, I could take you out to your favorite restaurant and I could pay for your meal, and you would say, yeah, I got a free lunch today. And as an economist, I can say, well, I could have done a lot of other things. I could have taken somebody else out to lunch. That food could have been used for somebody else. It could have been used in an alternative way. All the costs involved in making that food could have been directed somewhere else. There's always something else that could have been done. And that's why an economist will say there is no such thing as a free lunch, because there's always a cost involved. And that's what the meaning of element 2 is for.
So if nothing else, if there's not a monetary cost, there's other costs. You spent time doing it. So
So another classic example is there's a pine tree in your backyard. And by itself, that's going to create value. There's going to be shade involved. There's going to be lots of other benefits. And if I cut that tree down, I've got lots of different things I can do with it. I could make 2x4s and I could go build a house. I could turn it into plywood. I could turn it into furniture. I could turn it into toothpicks. I mean, there's lots of different things I could do with that. So when I choose one of those things, that means I gave up something else that I could have done with that resource. So, whether it's a physical resource, whether it's your time, whether it's your talent, think about the job that you have right now. By doing a very good job at your work environment, that means there's a cost because you could have done something else. You could have gone to work somewhere else and been productive in another capacity. So there's always something else that can be done because, and this is the really what drives this whole thing, because of scarcity. There's not enough to go around. There's not as much as man wants and nature provides. There's a disconnect there. So, because there's scarcity, we have to make choices. When we make choices, we have to give something up. And that's the idea of an opportunity cost.
Right, and there's some exclusivity to it also. So you only have, for instance, that tree. There's only one of those trees that you're dealing with. So you can't make both a toothpick and a house or a board out of the same part of that tree.
Exactly.
Same
Exactly.
as with time. You only have 1 minute. You can't do multiple. You can't use that 1 minute for different things.
Yeah, now sometimes we can multitask a little bit. I mean, I can listen to some music and I can have a conversation with my daughter. So there are certain elements of multitasking with time, but for the most part, I can do one thing at a time. The human brain is designed to do one task at a time. Now, we can multitask in the sense that there can be different stimuli going on, but in terms of getting a job done, I can only do one at a time. I mean, I can't be an economist and an accountant and a professional athlete all in the same hour. That
Right.
that just doesn't make any sense. I've got to give up one of those.
That's right. So that's where the choice comes in, and there's the opportunity cost. You do one, and the cost is you couldn't do other things, or you made that piece of lumber, you couldn't make the lumber and the toothpick.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about this in the context of government programs because
Perfect,
we
perfect.
hear politicians say things about being free all the time. And if you listen to today's political climate and talking points, certain politicians are advocating free items, free healthcare, free education, free. The list just goes on and on. And again, if you remember this idea of an opportunity cost, that means that if the federal government spends a dollar to give a child a quote free education, that means that dollar had an alternative use. We could have given that education to another child, or we could have used that dollar for something else. We could have built a bridge or a road or another building. We could have, instead of using it for education, we could have used it on a different government program. Once again, every dollar has an alternative use. So you can't give anything for free when you're the government because that means that you've wiped away opportunity costs, and it's impossible to wipe away opportunity costs. It's always there.
So let's go to somewhat of an advanced thought, and that is the relationship of incentives matter, and there's no free lunch. I mean, there's a correlation. There's a one works with the other, right?
Sure, sure. Yeah, so a lot of these 12 elements do kind of bleed together and overlap at certain points. And this is why economics is sometimes referred to as the science of choice. So we collect data on people's decisions and we try to understand those decisions based on the data that's generated. And a lot of times these two things do overlap. So here's a classic example of overlapping the two. Let's suppose that you have two choices of going out to lunch. You can go out to lunch with me, and you know that I'm going to pay. My daughters are famous for this. When they know they're going out to lunch with dad, they're not going to have to pull money out of their pocket. So that's a very strong incentive, knowing that there's going to be no money cost. But for me, I'm looking at it a little bit differently because I know, hey, if I spend money on them for buying lunch, that means I can't buy them something else later.
Right.
So maybe their Christmas present just got a little bit smaller because I just bought them lunch. Or maybe their education savings account just went down by $5 because I bought them lunch instead of because I can't do everything as much
Right.
as I want to. I can't do everything. That $5 or $10 that I spend on lunch has to come from somewhere else. I can't do everything. I can't provide them the lunch and all the other things that I would have done with those $5.
Exactly. So I know we haven't used this word, but there's a rationing basically of your resources. So
Yes, and this is where scarcity again rears its ugly head because there's not enough to go around. Everybody would like 2 more hours in the day. When I woke up this morning and the alarm went off, I thought, oh great, how much nicer would my day get started if I had another hour of sleep? Well, I've only got 24 hours to deal with. So, yes, while we'd like to have more of these things, we can't. Scarcity imposes certain constraints upon us. And because of those constraints, we have to make choices. We choose A, we give up B, and B is my opportunity cost.
absolutely. So that is those are good basics of economics. So the first two, so the scarcity of resources, opportunity cost, that there's some exclusivity in the use of the resources that we're talking about, whether it's time, whether it's the pine tree that we cut down and we're going to make pieces of lumber, or we're going to make toothpicks out of that. So you can't do both. And I know there's some nuances in that like you had mentioned, you can multitask, if you will. So you do get kind of a double use of the same time, but even that is limited. So
Oh yeah, that's very limited.
what other, we like to relate this back to the economic situation that we're in right now, the political situation. So everything is so politicized these days. And last week we brought in the Laffer curve and the effects of incentives matter on the tax rates. So the more you work, if you work more and you're taxed more, if the incremental revenue that you earned is taxed at a greater percentage, then your incentive is, I'm not really incentivized to work more because that extra dollar is now going to be taxed at 40% rather than the first dollar was at 15 or 20%. So as you work more and the tax is higher on those incremental dollars that you make, then you're less incentivized to make more money. So what are we looking at today in additional political ramifications of this second key element, in that there's no free lunch? We're looking at, as we started the show, we're talking about sending out another $1,200 stimulus check, or whatever the term is for the checks that have gone out to the individual. So people may think that, well, that's just free money, the government's just sending that out, but back to your number two element, there are no free lunches. So how do we end up paying for that?
Yeah. So the first thing to recognize is most of that money being created right now is not printing of new money, which the government has the authority to do, but we've had some really bad bouts of inflation in this country. And thankfully, it hasn't happened for a while because we really learned our lesson in the late 1970s and realized what a terrible drag on the economy inflation is. So when the Fed finally got the money supply under control, essentially since the mid 1980s, the United States has seen very low and steady rates of inflation. But if the government were to just ramp up the printing presses and print a bunch of money, then potentially inflation would come back. Most of the money that we're talking about coming from the federal government today is going to be borrowed money. And again, many people think, well, the government's just giving out free money. Let me collect my check and let me run down to the store. And that's not really the proper way of thinking about it, because when that money is borrowed, it's going to have to be paid back, and it's going to have to be paid back with interest. Now, thankfully, interest rates are very low right now. So the interest payment is going to be low. So let's just role play a scenario that more people are familiar with. If you were to take out a $100,000 mortgage and it was a 15% interest rate, that would be very expensive. The 15% on top of the 100,000 is a lot of money you have to pay back just in interest.
Right.
And if the interest rate is 2 or 3%, that means it's easier for you to pay that back because the amount is smaller. So the federal government has to go through the same kind of thing. It has to go borrow this money, and thankfully interest rates are low. So the interest payment back to the people who are giving the money to the federal government today is relatively low. That's the good news. The bad news is the principal plus the interest does have to be paid back. So this is not free money. It's free today in the sense that the government issued an IOU and said, hey, don't worry about it. We'll pay you back 10, 20, or 30 years from now. So it's going to feel free until that bond comes due. So what we call the maturity date. So let's just take a simple scenario. Government borrows $100 today at a 2% interest rate, and it's a 10-year bond, which means in 10 years that money is due back to whoever gave the government the $100 today. So for the first 10 years, it kind of feels like it's free because we get to use it, we get to see all the benefits, and the bill doesn't come due. Well, in 10 years, that bill comes due, and the federal government says, okay, I already spent the $100. Now I need to pay back the $100 plus the interest rate. And then the government's going to look around and say, okay, I need to collect some more taxes to pay this $100 IOU. So the people 10 years from now are going to have to pay more in taxes. So this is where the time dimension really kind of throws things off.
Right.
Because most of the time, as a consumer, you have to pay for things right away. You know, you go to the store, you swipe your debit card, or you pay cash. There's this immediate exchange between when you get the benefit, when you get to consume the good, and when you have to pay for it. Now, if you put in a credit card, okay, you stretch that out for 30 days or maybe longer if you don't pay your minimum payment. But for most consumers, that's an immediate connection between when the benefits accrue and when the costs accrue to them.
Right.
With the federal government, they can issue a 30-year bond. So they get the benefits today, but the costs don't come due for 30 years. And then it really makes it hard to make these decisions because for 30 years it seemed free.
Right.
And all of a sudden you get this bill 30 years later. It's like, oh my gosh, where'd this come from? I got to pay this big amount back. And it's like, oh yeah, that's because of all those bonds we issued back in 2020 for all this stimulus.
It really makes the kicking the can down the road a lot easier too.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And this is why we see so much government debt because, again, going back to element one, people respond to incentives. If you're a politician, this is a very strong incentive that you're going to respond to. You're going to want to give people immediate benefits, and you're going to push those costs as far out into the future as you can.
Right, very good point.
So the political incentives are for debt financing.
Right.
Because the alternative is not very appealing at all. The alternative is I give $100 of benefits today, but I also have to raise taxes by $100. Well, what politician wants to do that? It's not in their in self-interest in terms of their political career. It might make good for good economics and good financing, but it's terrible politics.
Yeah, that
when
really
was the
is.
last time you heard a politician say, "Hey, vote for me. I'm going to raise your taxes right away"?
Well, there's some saying that now, but yeah, it's interesting that we see that on the federal level, especially that we're just not in balance there, and we just keep pushing that payment process further down the road. And a lot of that is back to the incentives. The incentives for the politicians is not to deal with that now because it brings a lot of pain, both in just economic pain that the taxpayers have to pay more today, and they're basically paying for the errors of the past, and nobody likes to do that. So
yeah,
it's a big problem.
Right now, only the federal government can do this. Almost every state has a balanced budget amendment in their state constitution. So here in Florida, we have to have a balanced budget at the end of the legislative session. We all follow the news, and one of the most contentious issues is balancing the budget because
Right.
we don't have the ability to go into debt like the federal government does. And I know of no exceptions at the local level as well. Counties can't do this. Individual cities can't do this. Now, this doesn't mean that those states and counties and cities can't borrow. So don't misinterpret my words there. They can issue bonds to pay for certain things, but just in their fiscal house, they can't go into debt in the same way that the federal government can.
Interesting. Now you do read. I know Florida is one of the states that they're very, I guess, balanced budget oriented, and they don't spend more than they bring in on an annual basis. So that's a big deal for them, and that allows them, states like Florida, to be able to. They have a rainy day fund set aside, so that was really put Florida in a good position to deal with the economic effect of this COVID virus and the shutdown in 2020. So I know that we're probably at a shortfall now, but when the budget was passed, it was on a balanced budget, and we did have a rainy day fund that we were able to utilize during the shutdowns.
Yeah,
But not every state is like that.
Not most states, but not every state. I don't remember exactly off the top of my head which ones are allowed to carry a debt into a future year, but almost every state has a balanced budget amendment or it's part of their legislative process. And that's why the budget projections are so important because, you have to think about at the end of the legislative session, what do we anticipate our revenues to be? And then you set your spending according to that. So now, during our current pandemic, we're starting to see the effects of, the budget was passed way back in April. And of course, things have unfolded much differently than what a lot of those projections. So now a lot of state agencies are having to go through some budget cuts, or at least anticipate budget cuts, because all you have to do is look out your window to realize that state revenues are going to go way down. And most agencies are bracing for either a really bad budget year next year, or perhaps something middle of the year. The legislature might have to come back together because the projections were just so much different than reality given the pandemic.
Absolutely, we're going to see that in the macro, that yes, the United States, they're going to have a readjustment in the economic structure, and down to the micro, you're going to see university systems, you're going to see the educational system, you're going to see the municipality budgets, you're going to see them affected dramatically, all the way down to business budgets are going to change, down to individual people's budgets are going to change. So a lot that's going to happen in 2020 and beyond as a result of the COVID economic crisis that we've gone through in 2020. So I think we're on the unemployment numbers have been bad, but I think we're on the front end of seeing what the fallout of the lockdown is going to be.
Yeah, that data is starting to come in. We're every week and every month that passes, we're getting a clearer and clearer economic picture of the full effects. And in some sectors, it's worse than anticipated. In others, it's not quite as bad as anticipated. But from a macro level, things do seem to be improving a little bit. I didn't get a chance to read the details before I jumped on the call, but I did see that the unemployment claims did come down just a little bit.
Right.
So there's a little bit of good news out there. It's not great news. I don't want to oversell the good news, but we do seem to at least starting to stabilize a little bit. I don't know if we're necessarily on the upswing yet, but at least we're not continuing a fall downward.
Yep, I think we've
plateaued a little bit.
That is the good news, and that's what I'm seeing as well. So we have gone through the key item number 1 and key item number 2 today. There is no such thing as a free lunch, and as Joe pointed out, which I wasn't aware of this, Joe, that these are not in priority order. They're 1 through 12 are just in the order that the authors decided to put them in. So very good to know. And thank you so much, Joe, for joining us today on Answers That Count. This has been another good episode where we've really gone over some basics of economics, whether you apply that in your business, in the government organization, if you look at it on a federal and state basis, or in your own checkbook. This is, you related it to real life, taking your daughter out to lunch, that you only get to use that dollar one time. You can't use it twice, and you end up prioritizing how you spend the money, and there's exclusivity in how you spend money or how you spend those resources as well. So very good information. Joe, give them a wave. Thank you so much for joining us today, Joe. And
glad to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. So stay with us. Check us out on podcasts. We're on all your favorite podcast platforms. We're on YouTube. Like us there. Subscribe to the channel. And leave us some comments. We're on AnswersThatCount.com. So you can go to the website and you can stay up on the podcasts that we post. We put articles out there, so we'll have information. I've got an article out there that's going out real soon on the key elements. So we're going to go through each one of these key elements and have an article on that. Check out our previous shows. You'll like it. You'll enjoy it. AnswersThatCount.com. I'm Charles Musgrove, your host. Have a great day. Have a blessed week. Peace.
Answers That Count is brought to you by the Bean Team. For all your business accounting needs, visit beanteam.com for more info. You can listen to more episodes of Answers That Count on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio, or visit AnswersThatCount.com.